like the modern world is a rigged game, especially for men.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a feeling a lot of guys have right now.
Right. And if you're listening to this and you've been questioning the history of our institutions, how they operate today, who really controls them, and whether they've been captured by ideologies that fundamentally despise you, well, this deep dive is completely custom tailored for you.
Yeah, we are getting into some really heavy, fascinating material today.
We really are. We're unpacking this intensely provocative, ultra long new manifesto. It's an ebook titled First Principles: Rebuilding the Masculine Mind on the Ruins of Modernity by Conrad Riker.
It's a massive piece of work.
It is, and it's written specifically for men, particularly those of you in the men's rights and manosphere communities who are trying to really understand the architectural history of modern society, like before it was captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
And honestly, it is an incredibly dense, uncompromising text.
Right.
Like, Riker isn't just offering dating advice here.
Right, no, it's way beyond that.
Yeah, or just basic political commentary. He is attempting to deconstruct the entire operating system of Western civilization. I mean, from the language we speak to the evolutionary biology we inherit, right down to the legal structures of the family courts.
It's ambitious. But because of that scope, I want to make something crystal clear before we really get going here.
Yeah, the disclaimer.
Exactly. As your guides today, our mission isn't to take a side. Whether you lean left, right, or center, we are here to impartially unpack Riker's arguments. We're going to lay out the specific evidence he presents and help you thoroughly understand the ideas in this original source material.
We aren't endorsing them and we aren't condemning them.
Right. Our goal is simply to give you the ultimate shortcut to being well-informed on this specific worldview. But if you want the full, unfiltered experience of what we're about to discuss, you really need to check out Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books to buy the ebook right after listening.
Highly recommend reading the full text, yeah.
Absolutely. And do us a huge favor, hit that like and subscribe button right now to support the show. And make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker at Substack.
So to really grasp Riker's framework, we have to start where he starts. And it isn't with a specific law or a historical event.
Okay, where does he start?
He begins on the linguistic battlefield. His foundational premise is that before any legal or social systems could be altered to disadvantage men, the fundamental operating system of human society had to be weaponized.
Which is language itself.
Exactly. Language is the operating system.
Okay, let's unpack that, because if words are the operating system, Riker is essentially saying a virus was deliberately introduced into the source code of society.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
But how does he actually prove that? I mean, is he just taking classical definitions out of context, or is he pointing to a genuine documented linguistic takeover?
He actually points directly to institutional documentation. He argues that terms we hear every day, like specifically toxic masculinity, they aren't clinical diagnoses.
Right.
He frames them as semantic weapons, engineered specifically to pathologize healthy, necessary male behavior.
Oh, wow. So what's his main piece of evidence for that?
His prime exhibit is the 2019 American Psychological Association's Guidelines for Psychological Practice with Boys and Men.
I remember when that came out, it caused a massive stir.
It really did. And according to Riker's reading, this document basically declared formal war on the male operating system.
How so?
Well, the APA guidelines explicitly pathologize foundational male traits. Things like stoicism, competitiveness, risk-taking, and aggression.
That's a fascinating angle. Because if I'm understanding him right, his counter-argument is that those exact traits, the ones being labeled as a disease, are actually the load-bearing pillars of human civilization.
Precisely.
He's saying that stoicism and competitiveness are the very qualities that built the bridges, won the wars, founded the hospitals. I mean, you take away the aggression needed to protect the perimeter and the whole city burns.
Yeah, and Riker takes that exact concept and applies a classical educational framework to it. Specifically, the trivium.
Ah, okay. The trivium.
Yeah, this was the foundational curriculum of antiquity in the Middle Ages. It consists of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Riker insists that the human brain can only process objective reality sequentially through these three steps.
Okay, I need an ELI 5 here. Explain, I'm 5 on the trivium. How's that practically apply to the culture war over language today?
Sure. Think of the trivium as an assembly line for truth. First, you have grammar. And this isn't just about, where to place a comma.
Right, it's not just syntax.
Exactly. It's about locking down objective definitions. What is a man? What is a dog? What is a bridge? You define the physical boundaries of a thing.
Okay, makes sense. What's step 2?
Second, you have logic. This is where you test those definitions against objective reality to ensure there are no contradictions. Like, can the dog fly? No, that defies the grammar of what a dog is.
Got it. And the third?
Third is rhetoric, which is the transmission of that logically sound, properly defined truth to other people.
So, if I follow the analogy, Riker is warning that if your grammar is compromised, right, like if someone hacks into the system and arbitrarily alters the definitions of words,
Yeah,
then your logic completely fails. And your rhetoric just becomes empty, manipulative noise. It's like trying to build a house when someone secretly changed the definition of an inch.
that is a perfect way to put it. And that is precisely how Riker applies this to the phrase toxic masculinity.
How does he break that down?
He uses a formal logical syllogism. His major premise is this: a toxicity is something that systemically destroys its host. It operates as a net negative or a poison.
Right.
Then his minor premise is that traditional male archetypes of provision, protection, and production, which are entirely driven by male aggression, risk-taking, and competitiveness, built the structural foundations of every stable civilization in human history.
Therefore, calling the foundation of human infrastructure a toxin is a logical self-refutation. I mean, you can't call the foundation of a building a poison when it's literally the only thing keeping the roof from collapsing on your head.
That's his exact point. He believes the modern usage of the term is a linguistic virus.
Yeah.
It's designed to bypass logic by corrupting the grammar.
Wow.
And he goes further. He looks backward to the etymology of the word virtue to show how far we've drifted.
Oh, I love a good etymology breakdown. What does he find?
He points out that the Latin root of virtue, virtus, is inextricably linked to vir, the Latin word for man.
Wait, really?
Yeah. To the Romans, virtue wasn't this modern gender-neutral concept of, gentle goodness, docility, or politeness. It was manly excellence.
Interesting.
It was courage, martial strength, and honor, forged in the brutal struggle against chaos.
That is a massive paradigm shift for anyone used to modern discourse. He's essentially saying that masculinity and virtue are ontologically the same thing in the classical mind. But okay, to play devil's advocate here, does Riker pinpoint an exact moment when our modern institutions stopped caring about objective classical definitions and started prioritizing this subjective altered language?
He actually does pinpoint a historical pivot. He uses the University of Michigan's 1988 bias response team protocols as ground zero for this institutional shift.
1988, that's earlier than a lot of people might think.
Yeah, he argues this was the moment administrative bodies officially replaced objective physical crimes with subjective metrics.
How so?
Well, in classical criminal law, you have actus reus, right?
Yeah.
A guilty act in the physical world. You hit someone, you stole something, you caused measurable physical damage.
Right, there is physical evidence. A broken window, a stolen car, something you can touch.
Exactly. But Riker argues that the 1988 protocols replaced actus reus with the entirely subjective metric of hurt feelings or discomfort.
Ah.
Administrative bodies were essentially designed to operate as tribunals for linguistic heresy. The crime was no longer what you objectively did in physical space, but how your mere speech or even your ideological existence made someone else feel.
He calls this the institutionalization of neuroticism.
Yes, and he says it completely bypasses classical logic because you cannot objectively falsify a feeling.
It's like shifting from prosecuting physical trespass to prosecuting mental trespass.
Exactly.
So if language is the software that has been hacked, if the definitions of virtue, equality, and justice have been inverted to punish innate male behavior, then Riker argues that male biology is the physical hardware.
The hardware that society is desperately and foolishly trying to ignore.
Which brings us to a really intense part of the book.
Yes, the pivot into evolutionary psychology.
Now, anyone familiar with this space knows the basics of hypergamy and mate switching, but how does Riker frame it?
Riker asserts that male and female biological imperatives are completely different, they're heavily asymmetrical, and that polite modern society absolutely forbids men from discussing the scientifically confirmed realities of female nature.
Which includes hypergamy.
Yes. That innate biological drive for females to seek mates who are of equal or higher status, resources, and genetic fitness. Riker argues that women are biologically wired to secure the best possible genetic material and provision for potential offspring.
Meaning their attraction is inherently conditional on male performance and status.
Exactly. That's the evolutionary baseline he operates from.
But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly pretty challenging. Riker introduces this concept he calls epistemological hygiene.
Yeah, this is a crucial concept in the book.
He tells his readers that they should absolutely not be angry at female nature. He uses this incredibly vivid, almost jarring analogy. He compares getting mad at female hypergamy to getting mad at a scorpion for stinging you.
It's a stark comparison.
But I have to push back here. Isn't that an incredibly cold, bleak view of human connection for the listener to adopt? I mean, comparing romantic partners to scorpions, it sounds like a fast track to absolute misery.
It certainly sounds bleak to the modern romanticized ear, I'll give you that. But Riker frames it not as misogyny, but as the only path to genuine male agency.
How does that give men agency?
Because epistemological hygiene means cleaning your perceptual lens. It means stripping away societal resentment and viewing biological realities with the cold, clinical gaze of a biologist.
Okay.
You don't hate the scorpion for having a stinger. You don't judge it morally. You simply recognize its nature and build the necessary boundaries to avoid being struck.
So it's about radical acceptance of reality.
Yes. Riker argues that men suffer profoundly in the modern world because they operate under a complete delusion, a social construct he calls the covert contract of the nice guy.
The nice guy illusion. It's like putting coins into a vending machine, pressing the button and getting furious when a soda doesn't drop out.
That's a perfect way to visualize it.
These men view docility and politeness as currency and intimacy or respect as a guaranteed transaction from the universe.
Right. He calls the covert contract a purely magical, anti-empirical, and essentially feminine mode of thinking. It's a logical fallacy.
Because they think being harmless equals being attractive.
Exactly. The ninth guy believes that if he is perfectly docile, unassuming, and completely suppresses his natural aggression and dominance, women will automatically reward him with love and loyalty.
But that goes against the evolutionary baseline we just talked about.
Precisely. When reality inevitably refuses to honor this invisible, unspoken contract, because female biology responds to competence and strength, not harmlessness, the nice guy breeds a deep, toxic resentment.
He's furious because he played by the rules society gave him, and he still lost.
Yes.
Because society gave him the wrong rule book. And to explain why men keep falling for this trap, Riker relies heavily on the Coolidge effect and the 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer.
Two very different but connected concepts in his framework.
Right, so the Coolidge effect, for context, is that biological phenomenon seen in male mammals where they exhibit renewed sexual interest if introduced to new receptive sexual partners. It's the biological drive for genetic variance.
Yeah.
But where does Schopenhauer fit into this? I mean, he isn't exactly light reading.
No, he's not. But Riker leans on Schopenhauer's concept of the will to life to explain the illusion of romantic love.
Okay, lay that out for us.
Schopenhauer argued that the universe is driven by a blind, irrational, and surging cosmic force that just wants to perpetuate itself. That's the will to life.
Doesn't care about your happiness.
Exactly. It doesn't care about your spiritual fulfillment at all.
Yeah.
It just wants you to reproduce. Riker adopts this, arguing that romantic love is not some transcendent spiritual communion of souls.
What is it then?
Instead, it is a biological overlay, an evolutionary parlor trick.
A parlor trick. He's basically saying love is a neurochemical con job.
In Riker's framework, yes. He calls it a hormonal myopia designed by the will to life. This drive intentionally blinds men to the harsh transactional realities of female hypergamy just long enough to ensure genetic continuation and resource extraction.
Wow.
Yeah, the butterflies in your stomach, the breathless infatuation, the deeply held belief that, this woman is different from all the rest. Riker says these are literal neurochemical manipulations designed to lever men into investing their resources.
And once the investment is made,
Once the child is born or the resources are secured, the biological spell breaks, the hypergamy resumes, and the man is left wondering what happened to his soulmate.
man, if you're listening to this and feeling a bit overwhelmed, it totally makes sense. Riker is essentially asking you to view every romantic and societal interaction as a ruthless biological chess match.
It's a very unforgiving lens.
It is. And he argues that when a civilization systematically dismantles the traditional patriarchal guardrails that used to manage these biological realities, like strict marriage vows or cultural shame around infidelity, the fallout is devastating.
And he has the data to back that up.
Right, he points to a very chilling data point.
He cites the General Social Survey. It provides a stark empirical backing for his cultural observations.
What's the stat?
Riker highlights that the percentage of American men under 30 who report being sexually inactive nearly tripled between 2008 and 2021.
Tripled.
Yes, going from roughly 10% to nearly 30%.
That's nearly 1 in 3 young men, completely detached from the reproductive cycle.
Riker uses this to prove that when a society legally mandates equality of outcome in a species that is biologically driven by female hypergamy and male status competition, the society ends up at war with its own natural law.
And nature always wins.
Always. Because hypergamy dictates that women will cluster around the top tier of high-status men. The vast majority of average men are left entirely invisible.
So what happens to them?
The men simply drop out. They retreat into video games, pornography, and what Riker calls the archetype of the thirsty male.
Ah, the simp.
Exactly. The simp. The digital pay-pig funding online creators sacrificing their God-given agency and wealth for biologically manufactured, fleeting parasocial validation.
Which brings us to what might be the most brutal part of Riker's analysis. Because average men operate on this false covert contract and are blinded by the romantic illusions of the will to life, Riker claims they walk completely blindly into an administrative state that is structurally engineered to consume them.
Yeah, this is where Riker transitions from evolutionary biology to fierce, systematic political critique.
Into the meat grinder.
Right. He frames the modern state not as a neutral arbiter of justice, but as a surrogate husband and an overbearing mother.
A surrogate husband? How does that work?
The state's primary function, in his view, is to extract male utility, specifically taxes and child support, while completely stripping the biological father of his constitutional and paternal authority.
He calls the modern divorce apparatus a literal wealth extraction system.
He uses the term divorce rape to describe this process.
Yeah, calling it a forced, fiery, liminal descent and a profound ego death for men. They are thrown out of their homes, separated from their children, and forced to fund a household they are legally forbidden to enter.
Often under the threat of armed state force.
Exactly.
And to prove this isn't just hyperbolic complaining, Riker anchors his argument in specific historical legislation.
He goes back to 1969.
Yes. He pinpoints September 5, 1969, as a catastrophic day for Western men. That was the day Governor Ronald Reagan signed the California Family Law Act, which created no-fault divorce.
Riker characterizes this as the legal murder of the marriage contract.
He does.
Let me put an analogy to this, because the way Riker frames it is terrifying. Imagine signing a massive business partnership. You pour in your capital, your sweat equity, your literal lifeblood for a decade.
Right.
Then your partner decides to unilaterally dissolve the business simply because they aren't happy anymore. They seize half the physical assets, demand ongoing payments from your future labor, and have the state enforce this robbery with police.
All without even being required to prove a reason or a breach of contract.
Exactly. In any other area of contract law, this would be considered fraud and extortion.
That is exactly the parallel Riker draws. He argues that no-fault divorce fundamentally altered the power dynamic. It incentivized the dissolution of the family by removing the requirement to prove fault.
While maintaining the financial obligations of the traditional patriarchal model.
Yes. He wants all the benefits, none of the authority. And he argues it gets significantly more draconian when you factor in the 1986 Bradley Amendment.
Oh man, explain the Bradley Amendment, because this is where Riker claims the system crosses into outright tyranny.
It's pretty dark. The Bradley Amendment is a federal law that essentially prevents the retroactive modification of child support arrears.
Meaning the debt can't be forgiven.
Ever. Riker points out the utter nightmare of this mechanism. If a man loses his job, becomes severely disabled or paralyzed, or is even falsely imprisoned and later exonerated, his child support debt compounds inexorably during that time.
Wait, even if he's paralyzed?
Yes. The judge has no legal authority to forgive that accrued debt. It cannot be discharged in bankruptcy.
That's insane.
If the man cannot pay this mountain of debt upon his release or recovery, the state suspends his driver's license, revokes his passport, and eventually throws him in debtor's prison for contempt of court.
It's a terrifying catch-22. You can't drive to work to earn the money to pay the debt that the state is jailing you for not paying.
Exactly.
Riker constructs another formal syllogism here, doesn't he?
He does. He asserts that authority divorced from accountability is the classical definition of tyranny.
Okay, break that down.
The modern welfare state strips the father of his domestic and paternal authority. He cannot discipline his children. He cannot prevent his wife from leaving.
Right, he has zero authority.
But simultaneously, the state holds him strictly financially accountable via punitive taxation and alimony. Therefore, Riker concludes, The current system is fundamentally tyrannical and structurally oriented toward the enslavement of male labor.
The state wants the benefits of the father, the provision, the protection, the money, without respecting his jurisdiction.
Yes. But Riker doesn't just stop at the family courts.
No, he attacks the educational and psychological institutions that provide cover for this legal extraction.
Right. He brings up Title IX.
Yeah, specifically the 2011 Obama administration Dear Colleague letter. This was an administrative fiat that lowered the standard of evidence for sexual assault adjudications on college campuses.
Lowered it from clear and convincing evidence to a preponderance of the evidence.
Which basically means 51% certainty. 51%. Riker says this unilaterally destroyed the due process rights of men, allowing a young man's entire academic and professional future to be annihilated by subjective, retroactive claims of regret or hurt feelings, rather than hard, objective proof.
And if you ask where the psychological justification for stripping male due process comes from, Riker traces it back to the 1981 Duluth model of domestic violence intervention.
The Duluth model. That's a huge piece of this puzzle.
Huge. Riker argues this model is pure, distilled Marxist patriarchy theory, masquerading as social science.
How does it work?
The Duluth model explicitly redefines male power and control as the root cause of all domestic discord. According to Riker, it operates on a dogma that completely ignores female-perpetrated abuse, psychological abuse, or mutual combat.
So it assumes the man is always the aggressor by default.
Always. Men forced into mandatory anger management under this framework are subjected to what he calls ideological struggle sessions.
Struggle sessions?
Yeah, where they are punished simply for possessing masculine energy and told their biology is inherently abusive.
To hammer home how severe and inescapable this meat grinder is, Riker details a truly tragic, extreme case. He tells the story of Thomas Ball.
Yes, June 15, 2011.
Ball was a military veteran who literally self-immolated. He set himself on fire on the steps of the Cheshire County Courthouse in New Hampshire in protest of the family court system, which he felt was erasing his role as a father and driving him to ruin.
It's an incredibly harrowing story.
It is, and Riker uses this horrific event as a preview of where society is heading. Oh wait, I have to step in here and challenge this.
Sure.
Using a guy who set himself on fire as the baseline for an argument, that is incredibly extreme. How can Riker justify using an absolute catastrophic outlier to claim the entire legal system is irredeemably broken?
Riker actually anticipates that exact objection from the reader.
Okay, what's his defense?
His defense is that Thomas Ball is not an anomaly. Rather, he is the logical, inevitable endpoint of the system's design.
The endpoint.
Right. Ball was a man who played by the rules, served his country, tried to be a father, and found himself ground into dust by an administrative machine designed to extract his wealth while severing his bloodline.
So Riker's core argument here is that when a system fundamentally violates natural law, the results won't be mild disagreement.
Exactly. They will be extreme, violent, psychological, and physical implosions. And for Riker, the fact that the mainstream culture completely ignored Thomas Ball's sacrifice is absolute proof of the system's sociopathic indifference to male suffering. The machine just hosed off the steps and kept extracting.
That is heavy. It is incredibly dark, heavy material to process. And it naturally leads you, as the listener, to ask, how on earth did we get here?
How did the laws, the language, and the institutions become so fundamentally hostile to male existence?
Right, and Riker traces this intellectual virus back to its incubation point, the modern university.
Yes. Riker's thesis here is that the academy has undergone a complete structural inversion. It transitioned from an institution designed to teach the cosmic architecture of the creator into what he bluntly calls factories of ideological castration.
He contrasts the foundational purpose of these institutions with what they are now.
He does. For example, he points out that in 1636, Harvard was founded with a strict mandate to train clerics in grammar, logic, and rhetoric to understand objective divine truth.
But then he contrasts that classical mandate with the year 1935.
Right, which he marks as the arrival of the Frankfurt School at Columbia University in New York.
The Frankfurt School. This is where the long march through the institutions really begins.
Exactly. The Frankfurt School represents the intellectual incubation of critical theory.
So what was their strategy?
Well, Riker argues that early 20th century Marxist theorists realized they had a major problem. The Western working class had no desire for a violent economic revolution.
Because they were too comfortable.
Right. The working class in America and Europe was relatively prosperous, heavily unionized, and generally content.
So the classical Marxist model, the proletariat violently overthrowing the bourgeoisie, it completely failed. What did they do?
According to Riker, they shifted their focus from economics to culture.
Cultural Marxism.
Yes. Instead of attacking capitalism directly in the factories, they began pathologizing the foundational cultural pillars of the West: the traditional family, objective truth, and patriarchal authority.
They framed the traditional father-led family not as a biological necessity, but as a unit of latent fascism that oppressed women and children. Exactly. And Riker traces this intellectual decay through a very specific, sweeping historical chain. He argues it didn't start in the 1960s, it started centuries ago with a philosophical concept called nominalism.
Yeah, he goes way back.
Now, I hear nominalism thrown around in philosophy podcasts all the time, but how does Riker connect it to modern feminism?
To understand Riker's timeline, you need an ELI 5 on nominalism.
Let's do it.
In classical medieval philosophy, which is called realism, the belief was that universal categories objectively exist. A tree has an innate treeness given by God. A man has an innate manness.
It's an objective reality.
Right. But nominalism came along and argued that these universal categories don't actually exist. They are just names or phenomena that we invent to group things together for convenience.
So if nominalism is true, there is no objective reality to what a man or woman is. We just invented the categories. And if we invented them, they're just social constructs. And if they're just social constructs, they can be deconstructed and reinvented by whoever holds political power.
Bingo. That is the exact domino effect Riker traces. Nominalism rejects objective universal truth.
And that paves the way for the Enlightenment.
Right, which replaces divine revelation with human autonomy and reason. That inevitably leads to Marxism, which applies that autonomy to attack the family and private property.
And finally, that mutates into radical feminism, which declares total war on male authority entirely.
It is a centuries-long slide from truth is objective to truth is whatever my feelings dictate.
And the ultimate goal of this subversion is to create an environment where subjective emotion completely overrides objective reality. Riker illustrates this by bringing in the 2018 case of Peter Vlaming.
Yes, Vlaming was a French teacher in Virginia who was fired for refusing to use a student's preferred pronouns.
Riker uses him as the modern archetype of resistance, right? Like a man refusing to say 2 + 2 = 5.
Exactly. Riker highlights that Vlaming didn't harass the student. He didn't mock anyone. He just quietly refused to participate in what he saw as an objective lie.
He offered to use the student's chosen new name, but he wouldn't use male pronouns for a biologically female student.
Right. And Riker holds Vlaming up as the ultimate example of a man maintaining his epistemological hygiene. A man who refuses to surrender his internal logic and grammar to the state's emotional mandates.
Vlaming is the man who refuses to kneel before a false definition, even if it costs him his livelihood.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's summarize the bleak picture Riker has painted so far. The language has been corrupted to bypass logic. The biological hardware of human nature is ignored. The legal system is a wealth extraction meat grinder, and the universities are factories of ideological castration.
It is a very dark diagnosis of the modern world.
It really is. So if all of that is true, where's a man turn? If the modern institutions are totally hostile, what is the blueprint for survival? Did Riker find any historical societies where men actually solved this?
He did. That brings us to Riker's look at antiquity. Historical blueprints for male spaces.
Okay, let's look at the blueprints.
Riker looks backward to classical antiquity to find alternative models of existence. He asserts that the bedrock of any truly stable civilization isn't government bureaucracy.
What is it?
It is the existence of exclusive male-only spaces built on mutual self-interest, oath-binding, and shared risk.
But in today's highly integrated, hyper-egalitarian society, the idea of exclusively male spaces is heavily stigmatized. It's often immediately labeled as bigoted or discriminatory. How does Riker justify the total exclusion of women?
He uses what is called a Thomistic distingua. It's a philosophical distinction rooted in the rigorous logic of Thomas Aquinas.
Okay, how does he apply that?
Riker argues that while racial discrimination is a logical fallacy and an absolute injustice, because skin color has no bearing on competence or character,
Right.
discrimination based on biological reality is an absolute necessity for mastery. Riker argues that men require spaces entirely free from the distracting hypergamous dynamics of female fitness testing.
Because biology always kicks in.
Exactly. When women are present, men biologically compete for their attention, which fractures the brotherhood. To focus completely on Objective skill, logic, and the transmission of knowledge, the space must be male only.
He pulls some fascinating historical examples to back this up. He talks extensively about the Roman paterfamilias, but not the way modern historians or critics frame it.
Right. Modern feminist revisionists usually focus solely on the patria potestas.
Which was the absolute, almost dictatorial legal power the Roman father held over his household, including the power of life and death.
Yes, but Riker points out they completely omit the pietas.
What's the pietas?
This was the crushing weight of religious, moral, and civic duty that bound the father. The paterfamilias wasn't a tyrant. He was the high priest of the home. He had to embody the concept of gravitas.
Gravitas. I love Riker's definition of this.
It's beautiful. Rage subordinated to reason.
Yes, a man with gravitas doesn't throw emotional tantrums. He holds his anger and aggression in reserve, utilizing them only as precision weapons for justice and protection.
Riker also points to the Roman collegia as another example.
What were they?
These were private, oath-bound associations of craftsmen, merchants, and military veterans that operated completely outside the emperor's direct administrative control.
So they were self-sufficient.
Completely. The collegia were essentially self-contained engines of society. They provided their own insurance, buried their own dead, administered their own governance, and trained their apprentices.
And the state just let them exist.
The Roman state tolerated them because it understood a fundamental truth. Oath-bound men were the architects of public order. Riker contrasts this with the modern administrative state, which he says absolutely hates male association.
Because it produces autonomous men who do not rely on the government to survive.
Exactly.
He brings up the ultimate historical example of this homosocial loyalty and lethal effectiveness. The sacred band of Thebes, operating from 378 to 338 BC.
Yes. The sacred band was composed of 150 pairs of male lovers and brothers-in-arms who absolutely crushed the supposedly invincible Spartans.
Wait, lovers. How does that fit into a modern manifesto about masculinity?
I know, it catches you off guard. But Riker uses them to prove a universal biological law of warfare. Masculine courage and lethal effectiveness scale proportionally with the depth of the interpersonal male bond.
Okay, I see where he's going.
A man will fight hard to avoid shame in front of strangers, but he will charge directly into the jaws of certain death to protect the brother standing at his shield arm. The emotional and physical bond translates directly into martial invincibility.
And Riker argues that because this kind of autonomous male-bonded power is so threatening to the modern, centralized, egalitarian state, there has been a deliberate, systematic destruction of these spaces over the last century.
He traces the timeline of this destruction very carefully.
Where does he start?
He points to the 1893 founding of Co-Freemasonry, the Droit Humain. He says this actively stripped the masculine mystery from the lodges by forcing female inclusion.
Because it changed the dynamic completely.
Right. He argues that the moment you admit the feminine into the inner sanctum of a male space, the gravity fails, the tension dissipates, and the lodge falls to earth as just another social club.
He takes it further into modern law, doesn't he?
He does.
Citing the weaponization of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and Title IX to forcibly integrate private men's clubs, he points to the tragic modern decline of the Boy Scouts of America as the ultimate, undeniable proof of this dynamic.
It's a prime example.
The Scouts used to be a vital forge of American masculinity, teaching survival, honor, and self-reliance. But when they surrendered to corporate pressure, litigation, and forced co-ed integration, they had to lower their physical and psychological standards to accommodate girls.
They diluted their initiatory power.
Exactly. They lost their core constituency and ended up morally and financially bankrupt. But this raises a massive practical question. If you're listening to this right now, you have to ask. Riker heavily advocates for the total exclusion of women in these mastery groups. But in our highly integrated modern corporate economy, where HR departments dictate everything, is it even functionally possible for a man to build these parallel institutions without facing total professional exile and cancellation? Can you actually live this way today?
Riker answers that exact question as he moves from systemic analysis to individual action.
Okay, what's his solution?
He acknowledges the intense professional danger of stepping outside the mainstream, but he argues that the alternative, slow spiritual, psychological, and biological death is far worse. He lays out exactly what the listener must do to survive and rebuild.
And it starts with the physical body.
Yes, he calls it somatic sovereignty.
The flesh as the temple of the logos.
Precisely his framing. Riker states that a man who cannot command his own flesh, who cannot control his impulses, is a squatter in the temple of his own spirit. He demands that men completely replace the pursuit of female validation, the chase for likes, dates, and approval, with the grueling pursuit of mastery and brotherhood.
He champions an unbreakable triad for a man's life: God, mission, and men. Strictly in that order.
You notice what is explicitly missing and deprioritized from that list.
Romantic relationship.
Exactly. Riker argues that placing your life's mission and your loyalty to your brothers above fleeting, biologically manipulated romance builds an impenetrable psychological wall against the chaos of modernity.
The ultimate goal is to become what he calls the sovereign craftsman.
Right.
What is the sovereign craftsman?
This is a man who holds an irreplaceable elite-level skill that is tethered to objective physical reality.
So not a middle management email job?
No, absolutely not. Because his skill is real. You know, you can build houses, fix complex machinery, write critical code, or defend the innocent with violence if necessary.
He holds absolute veto power over HR departments.
Exactly. And over what Riker calls parasitic society. You can't cancel the guy who's the only one in the county who knows how to keep the municipal water treatment plant running. The state relies on the craftsman. The craftsman does not rely on the state.
To reach that elite level of sovereignty, Riker demands extreme physical discipline. He's not talking about going for a light jog.
No, it's intense.
He calls for heavy, grueling compound lifting. Deadlifts, squats, bench presses to build kinetic reality and dense muscle mass. He demands that men train in martial arts, specifically Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
So they know what it actually feels like to be choked.
Right. To escape from underneath a heavier opponent and to remain ice cold and analytical under the immediate threat of violence. And he calls for rucking with heavy packs for miles to forge unbreakable cardiovascular stamina.
He frames this physical exertion not as vanity, but as literal counter-revolutionary warfare against a culture that weaponizes comfort to make men docile.
And that brutal physical discipline must be paired with an equally ruthless psychological discipline, specifically a concept he calls masculine mirroring.
Riker argues that men simply cannot calibrate their own honor or competence in a vacuum. And they absolutely cannot calibrate it using female empathy.
Right, because female empathy, in his view, is designed to nurture and comfort. It softens the blow, forgives weakness, and makes excuses for failure.
Which ultimately makes men soft and controllable.
Exactly.
So Riker argues that masculine mirroring is the necessary ruthlessness of your brothers. When you fail, your brothers don't coddle you. They don't tell you it's okay and that your feelings are valid.
They silently stare at you.
Yes. Riker says the silent, expectant stare from an equal, a brother who knows your true potential, is worth 1,000 hours of modern talk therapy. It forces you to confront your failure without excuses and demands that you fix it.
And this evolutionary crucible leads to his critical distinction between an old man and an elder.
This is a key distinction.
Riker says an old man is just a male organism that has biologically decayed. He consumes resources, retreats into the comfort of television and nostalgia, and offers nothing to the future.
But an elder is different.
Right. An elder is a man who has metabolized his suffering. He has been through the meat grinder of divorce, the linguistic warfare, the physical pain, and instead of becoming bitter, he serves as a generative force to mentor the next generation of men.
It's a powerful vision.
But reading all of this, I have an observation. It's a major one. Riker is asking men to effectively become societal monks.
He is.
He's telling them to reject co-ed happy hours, to fast, to control their dopamine, to lift weights as an act of political defiance, and to completely abandon the traditional dating market in favor of austere brotherhood. It is an incredibly intense, almost punishing call to arms.
It's not for the faint of heart.
How does he prevent his readers from just falling into the black pill of total despair? If the whole system, the language, the biology, the courts, the schools, if it's all rigged against you, why not just give up? Why not just check out completely?
Riker dedicates a significant portion of his conclusion to this exact trap. He explicitly and formally rejects the black pill worldview as a logical fallacy.
Okay, how does he frame it?
He calls it a failure of both intellect and nerve. He argues that the collapse of the modern degenerate order, the crashing marriage rates, the failing institutions, it is not a tragedy to be mourned.
What is it then?
It is a necessary, fiery clearing of the ground. He tells men they should not weep over the collapse of a condemned structure that was built on a rotten, anti-natural foundation.
So he doesn't want men to try and vote harder or campaign to save the current institutional system.
No. He uses a potent biblical metaphor.
Yeah.
He doesn't want men to waste their energy trying to save Babylon.
He wants them to build Zion.
Exactly. He wants them to use the ruins of Babylon to quietly build Zion.
Yeah.
And the mechanism for building this Zion is the principle of subsidiarity.
Let's unpack subsidiarity for the listener.
Subsidiarity is the classical political principle that matters ought to be handled by the smallest, lowest, and least centralized competent authority.
Okay.
For Riker, that means entirely ignoring national politics and handling matters at the most localized male level possible. It means forming private associations, local trade guilds, mastermind groups, and physical training tribes that operate completely outside the purview of the state and the corporate HR apparatus. You don't try to reform the federal government, you make yourself and your 10 closest brothers entirely self-sufficient.
Which brings us to the culmination of this immense, sprawling manifesto. We have taken an incredible, challenging journey through Riker's worldview today.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We started by examining his linguistic deconstruction, the concept of the trivium, the etymology of virtus, and how words like toxic masculinity were weaponized to bypass classical logic and punish innate male behavior.
We moved into the uncomfortable biological realities, analyzing Schopenhauer's will to life and the false covert contract of the nice guy. We explored the assertion that nature does not negotiate with cowardice and that ignoring female hypergamy leads directly to the epidemic of male detachment we see in the data today.
We looked deeply into the absolute meat grinder of the institutional state. From the 1969 no-fault divorce laws to the Bradley Amendment and Title IX, where Riker forcefully argues the state has replaced the biological father with an extractive bureaucratic apparatus.
We trace the intellectual capture of the academy, walking from the rejection of objective truth and nominalism, all the way to the Frankfurt School's long march through the institutions, resulting in an environment where subjective emotion is legally enforced over objective reality.
We explored the historical blueprints for survival, the paterfamilias, the Roman collegia, the sacred band of Thebes, and saw how Riker believes the modern state systematically dismantled those exclusive male spaces to prevent autonomous resistance.
And finally, we arrived at his stringent demands for the future: somatic sovereignty, the unbreakable triad of God, mission, and men, and the urgent necessity of forging unbreakable elders who will utilize subsidiarity to build parallel institutions on the ruins of the modern world.
It is a massive, uncompromising, and deeply demanding framework. Whether you agree with his premises or find them abhorrent, you cannot deny the meticulous architecture of his argument. And it leaves us with the final, highly provocative thought to ponder as we close.
What's the final thought?
If Conrad Riker is correct, that true masculine virtue, virtus, can only be forged in the brutal crucible of struggle against chaos, could the extreme hostility of modern institutions actually be the greatest hidden gift to men?
That is a profound question.
Might this systemic decay, the terrifying family courts, the relentless linguistic warfare, and the isolation actually be the exact, albeit agonizing, forge required to finally burn away the softness of the modern era? Could this be what is required to create a generation of unbreakable elders who will lay the foundation for the next civilization?
It flips the whole script.
It really does. It's something you have to wrestle with on your own. If this deep dive sparked your curiosity, challenged your worldview, or even made you angry, you need to read the full text to understand the arguments in their entirety.
Highly recommend picking it up.
Reminding you once again, if you haven't yet, hit that like and subscribe button right now to support the show. Head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy the ebook and experience the unfiltered, extensive arguments for yourself. And finally, join the Brotherhood and continue the conversation by following @Conrad and Riker at Substack.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time, keep digging deep.